Hello, this is S.K. Williams, and today I would like to talk to you about the state of the world. Or rather, people's impending anxieties and stresses over the state of the world. How people feel as though the world is changing but not well. It seems we live in a time when everyone lives in a sense of dread and doom. Only the difference between exactly why the world is bad and what will happen, it changes. Those on the right, of course, predict that those on the left are destroying society. That those on the left, of course, say it is those on the right who are destroying society. A militant atheist will, of course, claim a religion, and most particularly the Christian religion, is destroying society. Christians in general are more generalized, especially considering there's different ones. But they generally see enemies coming in the forms of various different factions eroding morality, or disaffection from formal morality and society is simply social breakdown on its own, and a sort of fractioning of society. But in reality, while there are groups with which various other groups would have reason to oppose, at least in the context of their own belief systems, I do think that a lot of what we fear is overblown and exaggerated. But it really doesn't matter, because the fear, the anxiety, the dread, and the sense of impending doom, the sense of a need for action, a sense for a need for change, whether it is completely valid, completely invalid, or somewhere in between, it generally motivates people. And I do think that we are going to see a major social shift, but I don't think it will be a beneficial one. And I don't think it will be a permanent one. I think it will shift back. How long this will take is, of course, not something that I can easily predict. But this is because these sorts of things have happened before and don't always follow strict timetables that one can even estimate an average from. But I do think the secularization and what our media and society calls a falling away from religion, people becoming less religious, will increase. I don't really think people are becoming less religious, though. I believe that our modern-day idea of secularism is a religion, but we don't think of it that way as a society. Nevertheless, we tend to think that people are becoming less religious, and for what it's worth, I agree with that trend and think it will continue. But I don't think it will continue until all religion has died, and I certainly don't think religion will die and reason will prevail, because the forces of secularism aren't particularly rational. They claim to be, but invariably in the past, whenever they've taken over, they have been the most irrational and tyrannical of the groups. I'm not saying what some people may think I'm saying, but when you have people like Harari writing his 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, talking about secularism as this wonderful thing, and writing in his own book that secularism should acknowledge its shadow and admit to its failings, only to then completely subvert that by denying secularism has such failings, by claiming that people may have opposed organized religion, but they were not really secularists, and telling us that we should understand secularism as having certain secular values, the first and most important being a quest for truth, and the second one, more important than all others besides a quest for truth, which is the only one more valuable than it, is compassion, and how the Soviets were not really secular because they were not compassionate and did not seek truth, as opposed to himself, you realize that the same mistakes are being made. It's not like the Soviets were sitting around saying, we don't care what is truth and what isn't. Or they sit around saying, we lack compassion and that's the way we like it. Rather, the Soviets, if you read their writings, were exactly like Harari. They claimed to be compassionate. They claimed that Marxist ideology will lead to the greatest benefit of humanity that has ever been seen in history. It was all about compassion for the poor, all about compassion for the needy, all about compassion for all of humanity, so they get enough and prosper. And it's not like they rejected truth, but rather they were so convinced of their Marxist ideology that they could not bring themselves to admit that it could not be true. And Harari and others like him may claim that that proves his point. They may have said they were looking for truth, but they really weren't. They were driven by an ideology. In fact, that ideology was basically a secular religion, not secularism. But how does that differ from him? The only reason we know he's compassionate is because he says he is compassionate, and the only reason we know he is placing a quest for truth above all things is because he says he is placing a quest for truth above all things. And I don't really believe he is, considering how he describes religion and religious people and how religion thinks, and talks about how, in terms of policy or technical advances, religion has nothing to offer. It only speaks about modern issues in sense of identity. And even then, it is a hindrance, not a help. You realize that he's not really as compassionate as he says. A lot of the things he says that are derogatory about religious belief, especially Christians, who he is particularly harsh on, simply isn't true. Like repeating the old nonsense about how religious people believe in things because old books said so, or because they think a god said so, or they think a god wrote an old book and they have to be the old book because it was written by God, as if religious people don't put any thought into it. They just believe without evidence what they were taught at their church. They believe without evidence what their religious leaders say. They believe old book. That is a reductionist idea. And it carries with it certain other biases as well, such as assuming that there can be no truth in religion. Religion is made of nonsense. Science, not religion, is the truth. And it's not ever questioned whether or not science and religion are truly opposites and hostile to each other. It's not really questioned whether science is true and religion is false. It's just asserted. And we all know that Harari's idea of science is the same as Steven Pinker, or for that matter Sam Harris. His idea of truth is whatever agrees with his secular humanism and his secularist ideologies. The truth is, religion isn't all about believing in an old book that you think the creator of the universe wrote. Not all religions even have a singular holy book that they hold to. Even if we include the Bible as an old book that Christians believe the creator of the universe wrote, and the Quran, that doesn't mean every religion is like that. And ultimately, the Bible is not a single book, it's actually several. And it's not like Christians believe it is one book that the creator of the universe wrote, when it's really an anthology of several books thrown together that the evil Christian church lied about, deceiving people into thinking it's one book. It's never been understood that way, and it's never been approached that way. Just as it's not really true that religious people believe that their beliefs are infallible because old book said so, and old book was written by God, therefore I won't change my mind. The idea that Harari and Harris and Hitchens and all had about how religious people think is utterly false, just as it is silly to assume that religious beliefs were just made up and didn't address the real world, or else maybe addressed things people observed in the real world, but were nothing more than supernatural explanations for things we don't need supernatural explanations for, because we have the real explanation thanks to science. That is stupid, and that is not a valid view of what religion is. And viewing religious people as simple-minded, gullible idiots who don't question their beliefs and are actually causing problems in the world is not compassion. Neither is it compassion to tell us that we must believe in secular values, the ones he outlines for us. and tell us that we can believe in whatever silly, superstitious nonsense we believe in. We can wear whatever silly clothes or perform whatever silly rituals we want, so long as we embrace secular values. And we can even hold religious values, so long as, if our religious values conflict with secular values, our religious values are put to a side and we allow secular values to prevail. In other words, if there's a conflict between a secular value and a religious value, secularism would win. We must all hold to secular values, and if we also insist on continuing in our silly, nonsensical religions, wearing our silly little religious clothes and wearing our silly little religious rituals, fine, you can do that, so long as it does not interfere with secularism. Secularism must be supreme over religion, and if there's a conflict, we must side with secularism, not religion, and there's no reason to do that other than the assumption that religion is silly. Religion is all about silly rituals and silly clothes and believing in the obviously non-existent supernatural fairy tales in old books. Describing people as intellectual children who believe in fairy tales and old books said so and wearing silly clothes and engaging in stupid rituals is not compassion. You are calling them idiots and calling them inferior and demanding they believe what you do, and demanding that we all agree to follow this one list of beliefs that are approved of. And while we'll allow you these other irrational beliefs, we would prefer you not hold them, but you're free to pursue them, so long as, if there's a conflict between your beliefs and the secular beliefs that everyone must hold, you reject your religious beliefs in favor of the secular. It is understood that any conflict between secularism and religion is resolved by the religious person relinquishing their religious belief and siding with the secular value. There is no reason to do that, other than the artificial distinction between secular and religion that is set up in our society. There is no reason to assume that if there's a conflict between a religious value and a secular value, religion is wrong and secularism is right. The only reason we believe that is because religion is believe that a God wrote a holy book, and you believe old book, and the old book is fairy tales and wrong. The idea that secularism is about science and reason, is self-correcting, invites new information, constantly revises. That's not really true either. Atheists very often don't change their beliefs. Secularists very often refuse to change their beliefs. The idea that science is self-correcting and secularism is science, whilst religion stays the same, is idiotic. The truth is, religious people do change their beliefs and do revise them over time with new information. Religion does not remain static. And the truth is, secularists are just as adamant about retaining their beliefs and identity as any religious person would be, and often, if facts conflict with their beliefs, they will refuse to change them. The idea that secularists think rationally and base their ideas on evidence, whilst the religious go on faith, which is defined as belief without evidence, and refuse to change them, is not really true either. In reality, there's no such thing as religion. Religion is a category we created to help label certain things, but it has become apparent that in our world, the label of religion has started to be used as if there is this one thing called religion, and any differences people follow within them is more like a denominational difference, that all religions share certain traits in common. As Sam Harris said, and as Harari said, all religions follow a holy book. They believe this holy book was written by the creator of the universe. They also believe that there's only one holy book written by the creator of the universe, and it happens to be theirs. Coincidentally, they were born in the right race and country to know the truth based on that regional religion. And of course, since there's a plethora of holy books that all contradict each other, this causes problems. After all, my holy book can't be the only infallible holy book written by the creator of the universe if your holy book was written by the creator of the universe. Therefore, you're wrong. And besides, your holy book disagrees with mine. So yours is a fake religion and mine is real. Look how irrational and violent we are. That is nonsense. Just as it's nonsense to assume the secularist is always right in a debate with a religion. Secularists are often wrong. It's just hard to point to where they're wrong because they lie about things. Such as how they claim that Christians take credit for the abolition of slavery, but didn't actually abolish it. It was actually atheists, agnostics, and theists that worked for that, based on the beliefs in the Enlightenment. based on reason, science, and free thought. They realized through their common human empathy and compassion that slavery was wrong, and that people of African descent were equally human and fought for equal rights. Christians, though, well, their Bible condones slavery. They think the creator of the universe condones slavery. That allowed them to think of blacks as inferior. The Christian church even taught that blacks were like animals with no souls, and that made it okay to enslave them. And no church in America opposed slavery until around the 1840s, when they realized they were losing and swapped sides. Even then, most of the churches remained pro-slave, or at the very least it was evenly divided. Really, originally it was atheists, agnostics, and deists who opposed slavery first. And sometime later a few Christians joined them. But those Christians were a minority who came from radical denominations, the liberal denominations. And even then, they didn't represent their denomination. Most in their denomination were pro-slave, or at least neutral. So it was a tiny minority from them. Often they were even kicked out of their own church, but it was a tiny minority. A tiny, tiny, tiny minority within the liberal and radical churches that opposed slavery. And it was more because they were inspired by the words of Thomas Paine and by the words of the Enlightenment philosophers, not by religion, and certainly not by the Christian religion, which clearly condones slavery. So you see, in their retelling, it was the atheist, agnostic, and deist that was the hero. But the Christians later realized they were losing, swapped sides, and then took credit. And most vile of all are the evangelicals, for conservative Christians in the American South definitely were pro-slave, and yet the evangelicals have the audacity to claim that they were the ones opposing us. The problem with this, of course, is that it's a lie. It actually was Christians who were opposed to slavery before the Enlightenment. The Quakers opposed slavery before the Enlightenment. In the 1600s, you had Quakers opposing slavery. In 1688, there was even a pamphlet about it written by Quakers. The idea that it was the Enlightenment in the 18th century and not Christians earlier than that is absurd. Especially considering the Catholic Church clearly condemns race-based slavery, regardless of what atheist websites say. And keep in mind, these are the same atheist websites that will claim, or books for that matter, that will claim that all of the great abolitionist leaders were non-Christian. Like claiming that William Lloyd Garrison was not a Christian. Some sources will say he was a non-Christian theist, others will say he was a deist, a few will even say he was an atheist. But they all agree, when it comes to that group, that he was not a Christian, and that he opposed Christianity, and was a freethinker and rationalist. In reality, he was a Christian. They will say that Frederick Douglass was not a Christian, and more of a humanist when he died, when in fact he was a Christian. They will also claim that he said that devout Christians made the worst slave masters, when he did not say that at all. He was critical of religious hypocrisy. They will claim that he condemned evangelical Christianity, when he really didn't. They say that by priming you to see that. Our culture generally associates evangelical Christians with the good old South in America. But it doesn't seem to dawn on people that history was different. We seem to assume that the trend is the same, that evangelical Christians talk with country accents and they from the good old South. And back in the good old days, them bar Southern boys, they was pro-slave. So the evangelicals, those conservative Christian evangelicals, they was definitely pro-slave. In reality, evangelicism was much more common in the North than in the South in the 19th century. And in reality, it was the evangelicals who made it much more prominent. The Quakers were very adamantly anti-slave, but no one bothered listening to them. It was evangelicals and Baptists who mainly began the abolitionist movement as we know it. And as for William Lloyd Garrison, he was actually a Christian perfectionist. And you can't read any of his speeches or his Liberator newspaper or his books without him praising Christ. In virtually everything he wrote he did. There are a few things he didn't mention Christ in. But it's very obvious that saying he was not a Christian is absurd. It is absurd to claim Susan B. Anthony was an atheist. It is absurd to claim Lucretia Mott was an atheist. It is absurd to claim Garrett Smith was an atheist or a deist. They were all Christians. And that's the point. According to Harari, religion is always wrong and we should always side with secularism. But was it wrong here? Now, one may counter what I'm saying very easily. They could say, just because religion was right on that issue, and they won't say that, by the way. They'll say that the vast, overwhelming majority of Christians were pro-slave, with no evidence to back it up. I mean, I suppose they could claim as evidence all Christians were pro-slave, or at least none of them pro-abolition until around 1840, but that's not a fact, that's just a lie. You see, plenty of churches were for abolition before the 1840s. The 1840s is when things like the abolition societies and Underground Railroad began, but it is not really true that the churches themselves opposed abolition, or that they were all pro-slave, or that they were pro-slave or neutral. And that's sort of the problem I have with this secularist narrative, because the idea is that secularism is always right. We have this bizarre idea that we should rewrite history so that it was a secular, not religious cause for abolition, and we should assume that religion was actually a hindrance, and there's no reason to do that. Just as there's no reason to ignore all of the failings that a secular belief system has been contributing to. The idea that you can dismiss them because they didn't look for truth and were not compassionate doesn't mean anything. Because in the end, you can always write off any failure as not being a quest for truth and not being compassionate. But it does not fundamentally prove that a secular society won't make those mistakes. The idea that our secular ideology can only be judged by its successes and not its failures, while condemning religion based purely on its failures without looking at any beneficial contribution or downgrading those contributions, is not an honest approach to history. And the truth is that secularists did promote communism. Secularists have promoted eugenics and racial ideologies, and it's not even true that atheists opposed slavery in America. There were plenty of atheist writers like Samuel Putnam who were at the very least ambivalent toward the issue. And you could look on the Internet Archive and find plenty of atheists who did view the Negro as inferior to the Caucasian and believed that slavery and servitude was simply a natural state for them. This isn't really something that was exclusive to Christians. And really, that's the problem. Why should we assume that if a religious belief contradicts secular belief, or that a religious value contradicts a secular value, then the religious value must give way and we must have a secular one? Why can't we judge which one is true on its own merits rather than its source? The idea, of course, is that if we allow religion to rule, we get the dreaded theocracy and all that. But again, I'm not saying religion should rule. I'm saying that there's no such thing as religion. We're still talking about specific beliefs, about specific issues, and to pretend religious people, as we arbitrarily brand them, can't contribute unless they embrace this other belief system of secularism on top of theirs that is actually superior to their religious beliefs, and that they will always side with instead. You're not really creating a situation that allows questions to be asked. You're creating a situation in which doctrine and dogma will rule, whilst pretending doctrine and dogma don't rule, since it's not a religion. And it is a religion. Secularism in the modern world has become a religion, and that's exactly what it is. I have little else to say for this video, so I shall take my leave. Thank you, God bless, and goodbye.